We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order and get moving so we can get through these bills. Secretary, if you could do a roll call.
Roll call for House Revenue, Representative Brown,
Present.
Representative Campbell,
Present.
Representative Lean,
Here.
Representative Lucas,
Present.
Representative Riggins excused,
Excused?
Representative Storer, Representative Stivar,
Present.
Representative Worf,
Excused?
and Chairman Locke.
Present. All right,
7 present, 2 excused. We have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
great. Thank you, Secretary. We'll just want to welcome all the visitors here. Thank you for coming. I know, and thank you for coming, being part of the process. We're really grateful to have you all here. Real quick on decorum, please just remember, communicate through the chair, cell phones off, all that fun stuff, and please be respectful of all those who are up here speaking. And again, thanks all of you for attending. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Just really quickly, I'll go over the agenda for today and kind of the order. First, we're going to start with House Bill 246, Wyoming Wednesday. Second will be House Bill 181, funeral contracts, investments, and bonding requirements. And finally, House Bill 218, public utility stays during resolution of lawsuits. And hopefully we'll just get all those done this morning and not have to come back on adjournment. But anyway, so let's go ahead and proceed with House Bill 246, Wyoming Wednesday. And we have Representative Stivar to present that to us.
Good morning, Chairman, committee. This is House Bill 246, Wyoming Wednesday. We're just creating an act, Wyoming Statute 84118, Wyoming Wednesday. It's to celebrate Wyoming, the state of Wyoming, and have to bring unity, I can't pronounce it, unity to the state communities. For Brown and Gold Day, so every Wednesday is recognized as Wyoming Wednesday. That's the gist of the bill. I'm bringing this for a constituent that had asked me to bring it, so here it is. We need to unite Wyoming on Wednesdays. It's like Red Fridays, remember everybody wears red. Remember everybody deployed. Thankful Thursdays, just to get things going. So that's the gist of the bill.
Thank you, Representative Stivar. Any questions for Representative Stivar on this bill?
This was easy.
No questions? Okay. All right. Does anybody want to speak to Wyoming Wednesday? Okay, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike Smith with the University of Wyoming.
Thank you.
We don't have a position on this bill, but honestly, as a representative for the university and seeing a day that talks about the brown and gold, I couldn't pass up being here just to let you know that the colors brown and gold were first at the university in 1895 at our first alumni banquet. The tables were decorated with brown-eyed Susans, and people liked the look of it and said, hey, there should be our colors. So always appreciate any support that comes from any part of the state. And thank you all for your good work and time, and go Pokes. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak to this bill? Anyone in the public? I'm pretty sure there's no departments coming up to ask me or to discuss it, but.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Tom Van Cleef. I am a resident, a proud resident of the state of Wyoming. My wife and I picked Wyoming when we came back from overseas to live. She was born in Casper. She's proud to say that she's also a UW alum from kindergarten and first grade. But as Representative Stivar said, we've got a Red Friday, and I'm a veteran. And I love the idea of Wyoming Wednesday. It it's not going to cost anybody anything, but it's going to bring so much to everybody in our communities, and it'll bring all of us in our communities together. And I'm in favor of the bill, and I think that all of the people that I've talked to back home, who know about this, they're also in favor of the bill. So this is a winner for everybody. Any question? I'll stand for questions. I'm supposed to say that.
Thank you, Mr. Van Cleef. Any questions for Mr. Van Cleef? All right,
Thank you, sir.
thank you. Okay, anyone else like to speak, or shall we move ahead? And I assume no one oh, please, okay. Oh, okay, great, thank you. Sorry, Dallas?
Dallas Terrell, yes.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Yes, and I just want to thank Representative Stiver for bringing this and ask for your support. This is a great thing just to bring Wyoming together. And one of my good friends couldn't be here this morning. It was kind of his idea, and we got in touch with Mr. Stiver and would just like to see your support on this bill. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Carroll? Okay, thank you so much. All right. Anyone else like to speak, or anyone else from the public? And I'm going to assume no one online. Great. In that case, let's close public comment, and committee, your pleasure with the bill. All right, moved and by Representative Brown and seconded by Representative Lucas. Okay. Amendment? Okay.
Page 2, line 4, strike out August 1st and write July 10th.
Okay.
That's the state birthday.
Okay, so an amendment has been moved to, on page 2, line 4, strike out August 1st, change it to July 10th. Is there a second for that? All right, seconded by Representative Lean. Hang on one second. I'm just capturing some notes here. Okay, so on the amendment, does everyone understand the amendment? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, we'll go with easy. Any other amendments or any other discussion on the bill? Questions have been called. Secretary, if you would please call the roll.
This is a roll call vote on House Bill 246 as amended, Wyoming Wednesday. Representative Brown,
Aye, go Pokes.
Representative Campbell,
Aye.
Representative Lean. Aye. Representative Lucas.
Aye.
Representative Riggins excused. Representative Storer.
Aye.
Representative Stivar.
Aye.
Representative Worf.
Aye.
Chairman Locke.
Aye.
We have 8 aye and 1 excused, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right. House Bill 246 has passed the Revenue Committee. Let me get shuffled here. Just a second. Okay. Next is House Bill 181, Funerals, Contracts, Investment, and Bonding Requirements. Thank you, Representative Larson, for being here, and I'll turn the floor over to you to present the bill, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if I may, I'll give a little background on this and then go through the bill and answer questions. If you looked up in our statutes 2632, 101, and 102, which govern prepaid funeral arrangements, it takes up less than a page. And it's been in place since 1977. And when the agency, the Insurance Commission, which has jurisdiction over it, promulgated rules back then, it was a significant different time as this bill came to me from funeral home directors who have been working on this for some period of time. It was interesting to note that as I read through the rules that govern this, that it talks about contract buyers who receives an old age pension benefits. We would call those retirements now. We don't call them old age benefits. And it refers to the State Department of Public Assistance and Social Services. It's the Department of Health now. So it kind of dates the time that these statutes come into play and when they and when the rules were promulgated. These arrangements, the prepaid fuel arrangements, can be made through a variety of options, and I think the most common one would be you buy an insurance plan that pays your funeral costs when you pass away. So that's one option. And what we're talking about today has nothing to do with an funeral insurance plan. What we'll be talking about today is a prepaid insurance plan, a prepaid funeral plan that a consumer would buy through a funeral home. And when these arrangements can be made, there's a variety of options that the funeral home's not. When they purchase a prepaid plan from a funeral home, there's a number of options that they can use. But when the arrangement for a prepaid plan is made, the funeral home's not allowed to use the fund until the services agreed have been provided at the time of death. So the need for those services may not arise for many years, and the original amount paid for those services are subject to inflation. So if Representative Lean, who's young, bought this prepaid plan now, that contract may not be in effect for 30, 40 years. And so there's the insurance, the funeral home. The funeral home doesn't have access to those funds, and by the time they provide those services, there will be the impact of inflation on those funds. Acknowledging the impacts of inflation on the funeral homes are allowed by commission rules to invest the funds to the purchase of are allowed by the Insurance Commission rules to invest the funds used to purchase the plan in a variety of options to help offset those impacts. So right now, the funeral home is required by the Insurance Commission to have a bond covering 5% of the amount paid by the consumer. And if the funeral home invests more than 5% of the funds in investment other than those specifically approved in statutes, they're required to have an additional bond equivalent to the percentage of the investment. The cost of that bond is often in excess of the return made on the investment. So a bond, I think, as you all understand, is if you've paid me, if I'm the funeral home and you bought this prepaid plan, I have to have a bond in place that protects you in the event that I misuse or the value of that. And that's important because in a lot of those tools, in a prepaid plan, you can invest them in approved plans that lined out in statutes, or you may be able to invest them on your own as the funeral home. Well, depending on your expertise as an investor, you may be successful at that, or you may not. But at the end, we need to protect the consumer. Now, if on these plans that are invested in passbook savings, a CD, or revocable trust, some of those tools, the consumer who bought the plan has the ability to come back to you as the funeral home and say, I've changed my mind. Whatever the case may be, and I want to cancel that plan. The funeral home then has to give you back 80%. They get to keep 20% plus what of that. So that that requirement to keep that somewhat fluid is then again for the reason for the bond. But investment options have changed in the decades, and since statutes governing funeral homes was put into place, the statutes regulating investment of funds have also changed, including the requirements of investment firms to be fiduciaries of the funds they manage and to abide by the Uniform Prudent Investors Act, which is intended to protect the investor. Funeral homes have formed across the nation, here in Wyoming, have formed associations, and they have the ability to pool the funds, their prepaid funeral funds. They have the ability to pool those funds. They each have, and have those funds managed by an appropriate investment firm that comply with our current investment statutes, pooling those funds in a similar exercise to that of our state treasurer when he takes multiple small funds like the Cultural Trust Fund, the PBS Endowment Fund, and some of these other funds, and he pools them all together. You'll hear us talk about in the budget, Pool A, to where you can get a greater return, a greater long-term investment return on the pool as a whole, but yet each one is designated to the agency of its origin. And so in the case of the funeral homes, the funds invested in a pre-need funeral trust by the fund manager would be placed in an irrevocable trust, meaning neither the consumer nor the funeral home would have access to those funds until a person covered by the plan passes away. A death certificate is produced and proof that the contractual services have been provided, and then at that time, the funds would be released, plus earnings on that. So in that irrevocable trust, that money goes in and it stays there, which is different than what we talked about earlier when a surety was needed for a revocable trust or other investments, and where the consumer would have the ability to cancel and get 80% back. In an irrevocable trust, it's a contract between the consumer and the funeral home, and the money stays in that trust until a death certificate is signed and services are provided. Now, in the event that a funeral home goes out of business, the insurance commissioner can then authorize the death certificate and allow those funds to be paid by the fund manager to the funeral home that did cover the cost, or if the family paid for it, to reimburse the family for those invested. So there's a way out, there's a way for, in the event that the funeral home goes south or is no longer in business, to do that. Or in the event, per se, that death took place in another state and the services were provided there, that mechanism to get that out of the revocable trust and to the person that paid, to the entity that provided the services are there. The biggest component is that they're in there to get the highest rate of return over a period of time. Problem is, our rules, developed in 1979, doesn't contemplate this option. It still requires the funeral home that uses this irrevocable trust to have a bond covering the total amount being invested, which infringes upon the capacity to earn, okay? So, looking here, so I'm in my 12th year in the legislature, and have worked on, as Representative Stivar and I, and been down a lot of different roads. This bill came to me, I didn't go looking for it, and when I first looked at it, I said, boy, I looked at the rules and I said, I'm not sure that we can do this. But as we sit down with LSO and with Commissioner Rude and with the funeral homes, we just kept knocking that ball in the air and over the net back and forth, and finally it said, aha, it works. It's good for the consumer. It accomplishes what the funeral homes are trying to do, and it protects the consumer again. And so the solution in working with the department is we amend the current language in the bill to acknowledge the Prudent Investor Act and allow the investment funds in a pre-need funeral trust, and for that action to be an improved investment without the need of additional bonding. This type of investment of funds generated through the sale of a pre-need funeral plan is allowed in other states, and it continues to protect the public, requiring disclosures and requiring the trust to be irrevocable, as we mentioned. So, Mr. Chairman, with your permission, committee, I'd take you to the bill, and there's two components of it. And they start, they're both in 2632-101, and in A, if you look on line 11 and come over to the end, and this is existing language, it started that new sentence that says, all funds received from these contracts, pre-needs funeral contracts, or arrangements by any person either residing or doing business in the state shall be received and invested according to the requirements the department approves. And so then the next one says, investment in a bank, trust company, or federal saving, very conservative investment, right? Or saving or loan association in Wyoming is an improved investment. That kind of dates this language. Those are all approved, and in the previous sentence, you can also invest in the ones that by rule that are approved, but you'll have to have an increased bonding. We add the new language and we say the deposit of funds received from the sale of these contracts or arrangements in an irrevocable pre-need funeral trust, the funds of which are invested in compliance with 410-901, that's the Prudent Investor Act, okay, is an approved investment, just like the bank savings and loans that we have above. Earnings, including interest, income, and dividends from any investment in the irrevocable pre-need funeral trust may inure to the benefit of the seller, meaning the funeral home, of the prepaid or prearranged funeral costs, but shall be withdrawn from the irrevocable trust only upon occurrence of the event that requires withdrawal of the corpus of the trust. So when the person dies and you provide services. Neither the person purchasing the prepaid or prearranged funeral contract or any person for whom the contract is purchased shall be entitled to terminate or cancel the contract or make demands for funds paid for the contract after the funds are deposited into an irrevocable pre-need funeral trust. Boom. So that makes it authorized. Now, because this is just the addition of an additional tool, and as I mentioned to you earlier, some of the other tools is investment in CDs or a revocable trust or some other measure. We want to make sure that the purchaser has a clear understanding of what access he can or cannot have to those funds when he made this contractual agreement with the funeral home. So down on B, after it talks about promulgating rules, we add the language that says the rules shall require notice to the buyers of a prepaid or prearranged funeral contracts of the types of investments which the funds derived from the sale of these contracts may be deposited and the risks associated with the investment. So if you're buying this from me, I have to inform you how or if I'm going to invest the corpus of those funds, and your availability, your access to those funds, if any, in the future, okay? The rules shall require notice to the buyers of the ability to cancel or to terminate a contract or make demand for any amounts paid for the contract. Rules promulgated by the commissioners shall not require any additional surety bond for those money deposited into an irrevocable pre-need funeral trust. So, and then on the next page, talks about the Prudent Investor Act again. So, Mr. Chairman, after we knocked the ball back and forth across the net a few times, we think that this is an appropriate additional tool for the funeral homes to invest those funds paid to them for services that they'll provide years down the road to offset the impacts of inflation as an improved investment tool, yet keeping all the traditional ones in place and putting into place the requirement for the funeral homes to explain to the purchaser how in what manner these funds would be invested and the access, if any, they would have to them in the future. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd answer any questions.
Thank you, Representative Larson. Any questions for Representative Larson? Representative Lane?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Larson, for being here today. My question comes on, if an individual purchases this and then moves out of state and they're alive, is that money still locked up? They don't have the ability to move this with them at that time? Is that correct?
Representative Larson?
Thank you. That is correct. However, you move out of state, you die, another funeral home or the family, knowing that they have this prepaid arrangement, is not covered by Lloyd's Funeral Home in Lander, Wyoming, would be able to release that in reimbursement either to your family who paid for those costs out of state or to the funeral home who did provide the services.
Thank you. Any other questions for Representative Larson?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr.
Representative,
Chairman.
please.
Representative Lean, and to help just a little more clarification on that, that's why it's important that the insurance commissioner is still involved, because you go to them, he authorizes that. There's still some oversight between the consumer and the trustee.
Representative Lucas, and I'll come to you, Representative Storer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Larson, thank you very much for all of this information. What impact would this bill, the revisions, have on existing contracts?
Okay, Representative Larson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Lucas, when we draft legislation such as this, it's from a point in time moving forward. We can't go back, even though we would like to, in some cases, we're just not, we can't.
Thank you, just confirming.
Representative Storer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Larson, I'm curious if the term irrevocable pre-need funeral trust is defined in statute anywhere.
Representative Larson?
Mr. Chairman, and Representative Storer, I don't believe in statute it is, but it's an industry, I don't know if industry is what we call them, but I'll say it's an industry term.
Thank you, Representative. Any follow-up?
It's a type of trust, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Other questions? Representative Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Larson, I have one of these. And my question is, if something were to happen with me right now, my family can take all that money back and do something different. Would that change in my case?
Representative Larson?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, and I think, Representative Brown, I'm going to suggest that as the way I read it, you can, well, it depends on the one you bought, but I think it's up to 80% you can get back plus some interest and stuff, because the way that is, yours may read that a little different. But the one that you currently have today and the agreement that you have does not change. This goes into effect on, if it was today or a year from now, whatever, and from that point on, move forward. And the important part of this is yours may be invested in a revocable trust or some other tool that is also approved and doesn't automatically, and wouldn't automatically shift it over to this irrevocable trust. You would, when you buy this prepaid plan, you're given the options with the explanation of what that plan does and what access you do or don't have in the future to those funds. Does that make sense? Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Campbell?
We're talking about, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Representative Larson, we're talking about decades of time. If somebody was to purchase these, like you said, Representative Lean, she's young, so she purchases one of these programs. She has several children. It's 45, 50 years before she perishes, they've lost track of this policy. What becomes of that money if over 25, 30, 40 years, and nobody's aware, so they don't use this program? What becomes of that money?
Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, it's still in the irrevocable trust, okay? And the funeral home does not have access to it until a a death certificate is provided. In the event that, in my mind, there would be a couple of options available, because it's a contract for services. And if those services were never provided, the funeral home really can't say they're ours because I haven't provided the service. So then that comes back to unclaimed property or other avenues that you could ship that to. But it stays there without access to it until the owner is identified.
Representative Campbell, you have a follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and follow-up. So I am to assume that that money just sits in that pot of money because they can all pool all their funds together, so that money will just sit there and continue to benefit that pool until somebody comes in and makes a claim on it. Is that correct?
That would be my understanding, and that we could maybe follow up with the insurance commissioner and make sure that he sees it the same way.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, Representative Lane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A two-part, if you will, Representative. How much are we looking to pool together? Does this look like 10 million or does this look like 100 million? And what is the volatility of the account that you want to invest in? Maybe not you specifically, but the funeral homes.
Representative Larson.
Well, we would love it to be 100 million, right? We'd love it to be, but I don't know what that is. I want to say that currently the association, the pooled income, may be around 5 million, currently around 5 million. The benefit of, and I'm speaking really, Mr. Chairman and Representative Lean, back to what we've observed my time in the legislature and how we've changed our investment strategy within the Treasurer's office, that the stability of the fund that is longer term is much more stable than short-term, lower returns is. Now, the requirement that the investment manager be a fiduciary, so if he is about mischief or does something inappropriate, he's accountable and has legal liability for that. And that ties into that Prudent Investor Act that was passed to ensure that there is accountability in those type of investment managers.
Thank you, Representative. Any other questions? Okay. Representative Storer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Larson, I'm assuming then, so $5 million, the industry has some kind of understanding of what its needs will be, how many people will pass away in that pool that they will need to require to pay the cost of those funeral services, and that would be represented by X% of the corpus. And so that would be like the spend policy. And based on the spend policy, then the financial manager would determine what a mix of different assets would make sense in order to invest it for the long term. Is that the concept behind?
Representative Larson.
Chairman Locke and Representative Storer, your investment understanding is shining through, and that's a great way. So we have 5 million, and we're wanting to invest long-term, but somebody's going to die this year, right? So of that 5 million, what do you set aside that is more like a checkbook that is going, and of that, maybe $500,000 of the 5 that is set aside that is still invested, but you've got more access to it to pay the various funeral homes around when they have those consumers pass away. And so the percent, you're right, that there's a percentage of it that is available for distribution that at a more short-term investment than the longer term. So you're exactly correct, Mr. Representative Storer, Mr. Chairman.
Vice Chair Stiver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How many funeral homes are in the state of Wyoming that will be participating in this?
Mr. Chairman, too. I don't know. I don't know how many, I don't know. I think there, and so, Mr. Chairman, I don't know how many, and that'll be a great question. We've got Jamie Kirkwood here, who's with the Funeral Home Association. I think about, I don't know how many chains there are, but I think it's a great question for him, and they're not required to be part of the association, nor would they be required to invest in this pool. It's an option for them, but a great question for him, Representative Storer.
Thank Representative Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Larson, I'm kind of hung up on this Federal Building and Loan Association terminology in here because we know that those institutions don't exist anymore. They went to savings and loans, which there are only about 600 in the nation now. So I'm kind of curious why that didn't get struck, because it's really not applicable anymore. And then secondly, as I'm looking at statute 410, 901, and 902, am I to understand that those are, the requirement is for relatively stable and conservative investments?
Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, and Representative Lucas, to your first question on saving federal building and loan, right, would be a great amendment. Not a problem. That was existing language. That's something that is often overlooked, and people say, well, that hasn't existed since Moses left Omaha, so we ought to fix it. And it'd be a great thing to clean up statutes, which in essence is exactly what we're doing with this bill. We're updating, cleaning it up as a whole. And Mr. Chairman, if I could ask Representative Lucas to again give me the second question.
Representative Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Larson. Well, I was just briefly, last evening I was looking at the statutes encapsulated in the edits there, statute 4-10-901 and 902. And the approved investments seem to me to be relatively,
Conservative.
yes, and stable.
Representative Larson.
We're not taking a lot of risk here with people's money.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lucas, I don't know how you could get more conservative, which is part of the problem. As we've seen inflation up and down, and it was a problem, again, Mr. Chairman and Representative Lucas, that the state felt this is very similar to the changes we had to make in our investment policy, where for decades and decades, the state really only invested in bonds, very, very conservative. Had we been more flexible, our permanent mineral trust fund, our common school permanent land fund would be about triple in size of what they currently are. But we were just so conservative and so protective of these funds that it kind of reminds you of the story of the lady that went on the cruise and took all her own food because she didn't know it was paid for, and she'd sit in her cabin and eat her food because she just had just enough to get to the end of the cruise, and didn't realize that she could have been out eating at the table because it was all provided in her in the cost of her ticket. We have been very conservative. This is very conservative, and that is also why. So we say that those are the approved ones, right? And then in rule, the Insurance Commission in these rules say you can invest in a more aggressive return, but you've got to cover, whatever percentage of that corpus you invest in a more aggressive, you've got to also cover with a surety bond. Okay, and so they're trying to protect the consumer in case there is a loss. And part of that's, just the structure of those investments. And so this investment, this tool, being an irrevocable and applying to the Prudent Investor Act by a fiduciary, gives us the comfort that doesn't require the surety bond that we've put in place across statutes to help protect the consumer.
Other questions? And Representative Larson, I'm going to try to summarize to make sure I'm clear, and that's all. I just want to make sure I've got it right. But my understanding is, so the investment that's been in place for a long time requires this bond, oftentimes, depending on the contract, oftentimes gives this potential 80% back that a person requests. Is all this is doing is adding, that's all left as it is. And is all this is doing is adding this new investment option with this irrevocable trust approach, where they don't have that same capability to take it out, for example. And in this particular case, these strict guidelines are govern the investment of that irrevocable trust. And in that case, the surety bond is one of the differences that's not required for that additional investment. But again, conceptually, the consumer's protected in this, and I'm sure we'll get more testimony on that. But I just want to make sure I described it properly and I had it clear in my head. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I think that you have it very clear. I would just re-emphasize that the other part that we put into place is, as you as a consumer comes to the funeral home with this prepaid plan, that they then provide the options to you and let you make the decision on if you want it to go into the irrevocable trust and not have access to it, or if you want it in some lesser, if those are even provided by the funeral home. They don't have to provide them. But if you don't like the options, you can go shop someplace else, right? But there has to be that second NB that is to inform the consumer of their options.
Great, thank you. Thank you for your clarification. If no other questions, Mr. Rude, if you could please come up, that would be great. Thank you, Mr. Rude. If you could just state your name and then your role. Thank
Mr.
you.
Chairman, committee members, I'm Jeff Rude, I'm the Insurance Commissioner. We were approached by Representative Larson to look at this and see if we could loosen up some of the restrictions. And we had a good back and forth over several months, and this is what we came up with. Obviously, our role in this whole process is to ensure that if you spend money today, but you may not get the services until tomorrow or 30 years down the road, that the money is there. And so that's always been our primary concern. I mean, from the funeral director side of the house, that's a business decision. If they think they want to make this risk or take this on, that's just a regular business decision like any business can do with how they invest assets. But from our perspective, we're concerned about the consumer. I'm happy to answer any questions about this. I know there's been a couple entered about, and Mr. Chairman, if you like, I'd like to touch on a couple, I think.
Please.
Our stats from our office, there's 31 funeral homes in the state, 9 active in selling pre-needs. Of the 9, 5 use the master trust. So 5 funeral homes use the master trust. They're actually the largest funeral home in the state is no longer selling these. There's other vehicles where they can do this, which they're just, I think, more attractive in some ways. It involves a life insurance policy. And so the numbers are down. Our numbers showed that in 2023, there was 334 of these contracts sold. In 2024, that went down to 119. The only other thing I'd like to note is we understand this is that the statute talks about a very conservative list of investments. We looked at that. In my office, we do very in-depth analysis of the finances of insurance companies, and we have CPAs, and we have a national organization that allows us to utilize their expertise as actuaries and to dive in. And so we did an analysis of the risks involved, and they found other conservative investments that are also, that are similar. And so, I mean, I put my staff reminded me that in 2020, when I first came commissioner, I sent a memo out. And in that memo, we said, these are the conservative investments you have in statute. We're also, we've done an analysis, and there's a whole list of other money market funds that we gave. And so so our smart people, not me, but the smart people in my office, looked at it and said, this is relatively the same risk. It's very conservative, but it's more options for the investors. And it's, I mean, there's hundreds of potential money market funds. And that was 5 years ago. So that's where we stand now. I'm happy to answer any questions on the process or anything more you might have with this. About every 4 to 5 years, we look at each of these funeral homes and we monitor, funeral home A has this many contracts, 3 people passed away, they wrote 2 more. Company B does this, and then we look at the totals. And we monitor that. And if there's a concern with a big, and no money can be released without us knowing and signing off on it. And if there's a concern about that, we can look harder at the funeral home, and we can look at the master trust, especially under this agreement. I asked LSO, I said, does this give us the authority to look at this master trust and audit it if necessary? And they said, absolutely, we have that authority. And so that's the things we'll be looking at in the future.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I have just a clarification question. So when you say master trust, you're talking about this irrevocable trust that was described. That's what you're referring to as a master trust? I just want to make sure I'm understanding that term. That was just a new term I had not heard.
So Mr. Chairman, yes, there's the master trust, which is this collective that these funeral homes have gotten together in. Jeff's funeral home over here, I can do my own trust. Not part of the master trust. Or I can go CDs, or I can do whatever I want. But there's the master trust, and there's other money out there in trusts, much less than the master trust that I'm aware of. But they have that option.
Thank you. Any other questions for the Commissioner? One more question from my perspective. So I know I'm going to ask the hard question, but so from your analysis, this additional option, as far as you're concerned, this option, again, continues to protect our consumers. You think it's a good approach? It's a good additional investment, let me ask it that way, or approach to protect consumers?
So, Mr. Chairman, what I like about this change is that the money's locked in. I personally had concerns that if a funeral home is losing money, they're going to pull out all of the interest they've already earned and spend it elsewhere. And then when I've contracted for a $20,000 funeral today, and 30 years from now, that's actually a $40,000 funeral, I didn't know if the money was going to be there. So by locking it into the irrevocable trust and no one being able to take the money out and having the interest accrue there, I felt that was a protection for consumers. And it was just us weighing it out.
Great, thank you. Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a little bit different question, but there are cases where someone has paid for something like this, and something happens and the body no longer exists. Would those people be able to recover those expenses?
Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, if you're referring to if a funeral home fails and people had a contract with that funeral home, or are you looking at that a person passes away and no one knows about it?
Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, there are cases where there are fires, there are explosions, all kinds of things happen, and the body no longer exists, and they have contracted for a full funeral. Would their family be able to recover that money?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown.
Commissioner.
I'm assuming there will be a death certificate, and once we see that, yes, they will get, I mean, that proves to us the person passed away, where the contract, the funeral home has the contract, they should be paid. And if it will go to the next of kin, and if we can't find them, we work at it, and then there's always the unclaimed property entity out there that the Representative Larson.
Commissioner, Representative Storr, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner. So I just want to make sure I understand this legislation. Essentially, the nature of whether it's an individual funeral home holding an irrevocable trust of their own or pooling it together with other businesses. It's the irrevocable nature of the trust that allows us to then not worry about the bond being present. And is this, I'm still looking for, make sure that we have a definition of irrevocable trust, and do we refer back to the IRS or somewhere else to understand, or is that in rules and regulations? Specific.
Chairman Locke, let's see, with regard to, I'm looking at the rules that we've put out before, and we do not have irrevocable there, but we certainly, it's a standard term in the financial industry that we have knowledge of. I mean, we could certainly, if that's a concern, put it in our rules. I anticipate our rules to look something like all contracts made, executed on this date going forward, this will apply. And so we would spell out in our rules that, if it's, notice has to be given to the consumer, these are the options, revocable, irrevocable, this is what that means, and spell it out in that regard. I don't know if that answers your question, Representative Storr.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions for the Commissioner? Very good. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Anyone else like to speak to this bill? Thank you for coming. Please go ahead and just state your name clearly and we'll.
Yes, good morning, Chairman Locke and representatives of the committee. I'm Jamie Kirkland. I'm with Davis Funeral Home in Riverton. I'm an owner, operator. I'm a licensed funeral service practitioner. I'm working on my 25th year as being licensed. I'm a director of the Wyoming Funeral Directors Association. So as a funeral director, I very much support this bill. As the association, we have come together and we support this as well. This will help our association. This will help the members of our community, and this will help the funeral homes as small businesses in Wyoming, 100%.
Any questions for Mr. Kirkland? Very good. Thank you for bringing that forward. We kind of just want to make sure all sides are synced up, and that's very helpful.
Very much.
Thank you so much.
Good morning, members of the committee, Mr. Chairman. My name is Sherilyn Kaiser, and I am working with the Wyoming Funeral Directors Association on this bill, and I just wanted to know that, we do stand in support of this as our members, and we'd like to be available for any kind of questions that you may have and provide any additional information as we move forward. Thank you for your consideration this morning.
Representative Storr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks very much for being here. Maybe just give us a better idea of how many funeral businesses are in the state. Do they all participate in this pool to fund? The total amount, what kind of spending policy you have on that? And just to give us a better idea of what this looks like. Thanks.
Who'd like to speak on that? Mr.
Chairman
Kirkland, please.
Locke, Representative Storr, thank you for those questions. So as Commissioner Rude gave numbers, so a rough estimate, I believe there are 37 funeral homes in the state of Wyoming. Also, there are, I believe, 9 funeral homes that participate in the trust, meaning that they have money in the trust, but they may not actively invest in the trust. They may have money in there until someone passes away. And as Commissioner Rude gave numbers, there's probably about 5 funeral homes that are actively using the trust. And I, Jamie Kirkland, Davis Funeral Home, am an active member in the trust. A good question is, why isn't it higher? And it's because these rates of return. We lose a lot of money on these trusts. We need them to grow. We are locking in that price. We are guaranteeing that price. As was discussed earlier, for how long, we don't know. Some of them go 3 months, some of them go 3 years, some go 20 years. So we are needing this to grow money to guard against inflation. I believe that if we are able to move this bill forward, it will be very much more encouraging for funeral homes to invest their money into this trust. I always look at this as your workbench. You need to have a couple tools in your drawer, and this is one of them. So this is an irrevocable funeral trust that has worked for funeral homes for many years, because we'll have customers walk in our door that don't even know this exists. They think that they might be walking into a funeral home with a question that they think is very uncommon, that they need to prepay or pre-plan their family member's funeral, and they were just told they needed to spend down mom or dad's estate, and they need to spend it down very quickly for Medicaid. This is a way that a family can spend down, that Medicaid recognizes as an eligible asset to have. So this helps families very much when they're caring for their families that are going to go into a care facility.
Great. Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just looking at the Representative Store and their breakdown on investments, I think you asked this me earlier, but it's about a 70-30 breakdown there on the cash equivalents and fixed income.
Okay, any other questions? Representative Campbell.
Yeah, I'm curious, with this option, it looks like it's decreasing like 60%, the numbers that were discussed, going from 300 and something down to 100 and some. Is this eventually, do you think, just going to kind of fade away because of the other options available? I'm just wondering how long the viability of this is going to be.
Mr. Kirkland.
Yes, Chairman Locke, Representative Campbell, that's a very good question. I don't know the exact answer, but the question of how much longer this will stay around, I think will be for quite some time. This is, like I said, this is just another option for a funeral home to help their customers. Are some other investments, it just depends on the person that's coming in to prearrange. I might have someone that's very young that comes in and prearranges, and it might be, and they're in good health. And so they might want to look at an insurance plan through something totally different. I mean, you might look at New York Life, you might look at Mutual of Omaha. But on these funeral trusts, there's no health questions. You make payments today, and when you make payments, you pay it in full. You're taken care of. So this is why funeral homes will also use this as a way to help their community put aside money. Funeral homes guarantee the price when they do an irrevocable funeral plan. So say, let's bring up cremation. If they do a cremation plan for $3,000, and then next year it's $4,000, the funeral home is going to guarantee that $3,000, even if it didn't grow to $3,000. But if you buy an insurance policy and there were health questions, you're only going to get probably what you started paying into that. So this is a very good option to have for your community. This is something I'm looking at for my own parents. My parents right now are in the situation where I need to plan their services and pay ahead of time. So this is what I'm doing for myself. I want to make sure I have the very best possible for my community, but this is definitely what I need to do for my own parents. I need to do this for myself. We all need to do it. Talking to the committee yesterday, one of you told me, I've already done this. I've already set my money aside. And so it's not new. We just need to invest the money so the funeral homes can make money and not lose. I'm losing about $400 every time on a cremation right now. I'm losing anywhere from there to $1,900 on a burial. It hurts. But I still need to do this for members of the community. So we appreciate this very much. And I appreciate Commissioner Rude, Representative Larson for bringing this together and bringing this bill to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a question. Excuse me. I understand you'll have a contract that's written up, but I know one of the things that I had to deal with, I all of a sudden I woke up one day and had a child that was looking at possibly facing, life-threatening illnesses. And I know my parents had purchased 2 sites, and they had a third one that they had purchased. I'm assuming that the funeral homes would work with somebody if they had a contract, but you had something else that arose where maybe that site might be used for a family member that they had not maybe considered. I would assume that you have the latitude to adjust that and maybe put somebody else on that. Are you bound to it specific to that one person, or can that be amended in the event that they have an unexpected loss in the family?
Mr. Kirkland, please.
Chairman Locke, Representative Worf, thank you for that question because that does come up. So these are irrevocable funeral trusts. These are designated for that person that came in, or someone came in for that person. So yes, some very unexpected, very devastating situations happen like that. But these trusts actually have that person's name on it, their date of birth, their social security number. So it is tied to it. So it can't be used for anybody but for that person. But with that question, so if you wake up and all of a sudden one day your child is incapacitated and they are needing to go on state assistance very quick. So we do have quite a few people that have their children have their funeral plans prepaid because the parents know they're not going to be around to take care of that child when that time comes, and they want to make sure that it's taken care of and with their wishes, because they're not going to be here when that child passes. So to answer your question, they're tied to the exact plan.
And I guess, if I can follow up, I guess the question I have, I know my parents, the one site didn't have a name tied to it. I didn't know if you had the ability to basically secure arrangements, because like I said, they bought, I think they actually purchased enough for the whole family, but they had slowly sold them off. But I just wondered if there's a way that you could cover unnamed, but it sounds like to me it's got to be specific from what you said.
Chairman Locke, Representative Worf, are you referring to a cemetery plot? Okay, so that's a cemetery plot, so that's very much different than this irrevocable funeral trust. So the funeral trust is specifically about a funeral service merchandise or cremation plans. A cemetery plot, so I'll give you an example. In Riverton, we can purchase up to 8 plots. And so if my wife and I went to the cemetery and we bought those 8 plots, we would put our names on there. And then that would then go to the heirs of my wife and I after we pass. So a lot of times it might be that Jamie and Tommy Kirkland own these 8 lots, but it doesn't say who's in there. So it just needs to, if there was research on a cemetery plot, it would say who are the heirs of who owns these plots.
Okay.
But
and-
that's a separate.
Yes,
yeah,
Mr.
it's-
Chairman, yeah, and that's what I was wanting to know, because I know they bought a package, my parents bought a package deal that covered everything. But that was the one thing they didn't have, was a specific name on who was going to be in the plot.
But that's
But-
not.
So you're talking about just the services? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, any other questions? Right, is there anyone else who would like to speak to this? Okay, then we'll close public comment. And committee? Great. So it is moved by Representative Stivar and seconded by Representative War. All right, committee, let's talk about the bill. Any amendments? Let's work the bill. And any amendments? Page 1, page 2. Page 2, okay.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that we should amend Federal Building and Loan Association on line 16 on page 2 to be its modern-day equivalent, because these haven't existed since 1930.
Do you know what the language for
Yeah,
that
it's
is?
Federal Savings and Loan Association. Yes.
Federal. So we just strike building and, oh, no,
No,
sorry.
just-
Building, so savings.
Yes, that's even better. Strike building and insert
Put in
savings.
savings, okay. So is that amendment clear to everyone? Representative Lucas has moved an amendment, seconded by Representative Worf. Great. Any discussion on this amendment, or all in favor, say aye? Aye. Opposed? Okay, great. So moving page 2, page 3. Any amendments on page 4? Okay, any discussion on the bill before we vote? Okay. Donna, would you please call the roll?
This is a roll call vote on House Bill 181 as amended, funeral contracts, investment and bonding requirements. Representative Brown,
Aye.
Representative Campbell,
Aye.
Representative Lean,
Aye.
Representative Lucas,
Aye.
Representative Riggins excused, Representative Storer,
Aye.
Representative Stivar,
Aye.
Representative Worf,
Aye.
Chairman Locke.
Aye.
We have 8 aye and 1 excused, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the questions and the discussion.
thank you, and I assume you've got it on the floor, Representative Larson?
Well, I may drop it, but I'll try.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. And thank you, everybody, for coming and testifying on this. I really appreciate the clarification and making sure we had that one covered. Okay. All right, so we are now moving on to, I'll find my list here in a brief second. So we are moving on to House Bill 218, Public Utility Stays During Resolution of Lawsuits. And I will relinquish the floor to Vice Chairman Stivar to run this bill. So one moment. So, yeah, watch out for Vice Chairman Stivar. He's dangerous. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So House Bill 218, Public Utility Stays During Resolution of Lawsuits. So let me just describe this one just a little bit. I'm going to summarize it fairly quickly, and then we'll get to the bill. But in short, the objective here is that when there are lawsuits, utilities suing the state and/or the commission, Public Service Commission, the concept with this bill was that when there's lawsuits for certain reasons, they may be reasons that, depending on the actions that are taking in terms of rate cases and those kinds of things, there may be reasons for us to put a stay on those, depending on the reasons of the lawsuit, to make sure that until the lawsuits are resolved, then those cases can be appropriately resolved. That was kind of in general. But let me get to the bill, and that'll hopefully make that all just a little bit clearer. So kind of stepping through page 1 is kind of all the fluff part, so we'll skip ahead. But what happens is, just at the very bottom of page 1, we begin with changes to, section 1 right there on page 9 talks about it. We see changes to our statute in 37.2.130 and 37.2.214. And at the bottom of the page there, where it's 37.2.130, I think the statute currently says right of review, and what's added to that is stay of proceedings. And you'll see at the top of page 2, really the first bullet, and all this really does is it adds A to that paragraph. Everything you see below what the new text there was there, but it adds that A, and it says subject to subsections B and C of this section. And then you're going to see that those B and C are really the pieces that get added in. So I'm going to jump down to line 12 on page 2 and talk to this a little bit. If a public utility files a lawsuit that challenges or seeks judicial review under this section, and this is the wording that's kind of important, by challenging the constitutionality or legality of a provision of this act or of a rule, regulation, or procedure of the commission. So the focus here is if they're challenging the laws or rules that the commission has applied to a decision. That's the objective, very specific objective of this bill, okay? And it says, or that raises an argument under Wyoming statute 16.3.14. Now, this particular statute is all this really is this is over in kind of the city, county, and state and local powers statute. And this talks a little bit about some of the judicial review actions that district courts use as that refers to the commission. So this is just an area that can be where the courts, for example, the district court, how they address the commission. So this is not really significant in here, but the commission shall stay each request or application, rate case, and other matter that requires, now here again, this is the real key to this entire bill, that requires or consideration of the challenged statute, rule, regulation, or procedure. So it's, as I described before, this is if the lawsuit is related to laws, rules, or procedures, right? And it's if this rate case or other matter is specifically consideration challenges that same, the rules, regulation, or procedure and the objective here is until the lawsuit or judicial review is fully resolved and closed. And here was my entire intent with this. So if you think about it, if you've made a decision on a rate case and a utility comes in and says, hey, you didn't apply the rules right. You didn't apply the laws right. And then they go and put in another rate case that would have to be addressed using the same rules, laws, and procedures, right? The concept is, how can that be? If we're in the middle of a lawsuit, how can we then not resolve, or how can we then make a decision on the next rate case when those rules are already being contested in court? So it's sort of simple and fairly focused on the fact that if you come and sue us based on the rules we used, and then you put another rate case or another matter in, we would have to make a decision, and we, I'm talking about the commission, of course. I'm trying to put that in place. I should be careful about that. It's not we, the legislator. This is we, the commission, Public Service Commission. Then it's very hard for them to make a decision on this rate case, knowing we're in court on the very rules we use. So it tries to be very focused, and you'll see that in that section B as you go down through there. That's what it's focused on. Okay? And then one of the things, so let me just address it. So I'll start kind of at the bottom. This subsection, so I'm at line 22 at the bottom of page 2. This subsection shall apply to all request, application, rate cases, and other matters before the commission impacted by the challenged statute, rule, regulation, or procedure, or that requires the application of the challenged statute, rule, regulation, or procedure. Okay? And so you can see it's very focused on if you're suing us on this rule and it requires application of this rule, those are the things that have to be stated. Now, there's many different types of rate cases and those kinds of things. The goal was not to block everything. That would not make sense for the Public Services Commission, but that's kind of where this this bill is going. Now, on page 3, going to line C, this sort of does similar clarification, but section C, subsection B of this section shall not apply to any lawsuit or judicial review based on the commission's application of facts or evidence to resolve or a resolution of disputed facts or evidence on the basis of an argument raised. And here again is another statute. It refers back to that other statute, a portion of that other statute. And then Romanet 2, any action that the commission begins and prosecutes for violation under, and this is another statute that it mentions. And then finally, the only other change to this bill is it is just referred back to on page 3, line 19. It just references back to section B and section C that we just reviewed. That is the bill. And again, I want to stress the fact that it is these stays. So this, for example, a rate case that would come up, it would only be stayed if, for example, it would have to be addressed specifically with the rules under which the commission was in a lawsuit. So it wouldn't be, if this was a rate case that came up and was addressed via different set of rules or procedures, it would not be part of this bill. Only in the case where specific regulations and rules, the suit was you applied these regulations and rules, and then this rate case required application of those regulations, the commission's regulations rules against this new rate case. And very clearly, I wanted to make it clear in this section C, if the lawsuit says, let's say a utility company comes in and says, hey, you didn't apply the facts right, or you didn't include the facts properly, okay? That's not what we're trying to put a stay on here. That's a different issue, and this would not apply to that. That's why that section C is in there, to make sure that's clear. Okay, Mr. Chairman, please stand for questions.
Representative Campbell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Locke. So the way that I'm to understand this is only applicable to an apple for an apple case, to where we cannot put the cart in front of the horse. We can't jump ahead of an existing case that is already engaged with that statute. We must deal with the first hike, so to speak, first, before we can address any future hikes under that same statute. We must address first, then second. on an apple-to-apple case, is that correct?
Chairman Locke?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Campbell, so if I understood your question correctly, yes, it would be, so if there's let's call it Apple 1, rate case 1, so these exact rules had to be applied to that rate case, right? And the commission goes through that process and makes a decision based on those rules. Then this would only apply in a case where a utility then comes in, sues against that case, and then turns around and applies a similar / identical case using, that would require the commission to apply the exact same rules. So yes, apple to apple in terms of the rate cases that are being affected. Because I know there are many other rate case applications where I'm sure the commission, and I'll not say that I have any idea the breadth and of that. That is for the commission experts to do that. But I know that there's a wide range of types of rate cases and things that can come in. And in the case where the same rules are not applied, those rate cases based on this bill should not be affected in the state.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Locke. That tells me that yes, an apple for an apple on those specific cases, but it doesn't apply to a banana, an orange, a grape. Anything else can still affect tax rates just as it currently does. It's just where there is question in that one statute, or where their identical wording is involved, where we've got to clarify before we can move forward with any future. We've got to clarify what's going on before we can move forward in that circumstance, correct?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Campbell, yes, and that was really the key. The whole concept was here is if it's an apple-to-apple case, and so hopefully we've got that clearly understood. If it's an apple-to-apple case, that's the tricky issue. If we continue to, the question was, if we continue to try to make decisions on rules and regulations that are in a lawsuit, I don't know what the right word is for the legal experts in the room. I'm not an attorney and I don't play one on TV. So, but you know, would that, for example, prejudice other cases that might be out there that are using the exact same rules that are being litigated, for example? So.
Any more questions? Representative Storr?
Thank you, Chairman, Vice Chairman Stivar. Chairman Locke, I'm still having trouble understanding this. If you could help me understand, or give me two examples. An example where the rules would be in question and keep a utility or discourage a utility from suing, and when they would not, when it's based on facts. That's how I'm kind of reading this. So, and maybe this is a question for our commissioners who are here with us, but I just wondered if you could help me understand exactly, like a good example of when this would apply. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Storr, so I'm sure that the commission would probably do a better job of this, but I'll give you the simple, the plebe version a little bit from my perspective, okay? So bear with me. But in this case, for example, a rate case that came out that said that required the, and I'm going to generalize a little bit, so bear with me. But a rate case came out and maybe I shouldn't go there, so I'll talk more generally, sorry. I'll be careful so I don't get too specific. But a rate case comes out and the commission comes in and says, hey, you know, you asked for X%, but based on our rules, the rules and laws that we have to apply, you know what? You asked for this, you asked for that. Our rules require, say, you can ask for this. And so it's not going to be, let's say, 20%, it's going to be 10%. Okay, so they use, the Public Service Commission used some rules and guidelines based on they're fair and equitable, or whatever their laws are, fair and reasonable, I think it is in some of their laws and statutes. And in that case, for that rate case, let's just say that the utility comes in and sues and says, hey, you applied those rules wrong. That's the real key. You applied those rules. You applied those laws incorrectly to what we did. That's the case we're talking about here. In other cases, because if you think about it on any case, the commission's having to apply their laws, regulations, and procedures to facts as well. So let me give you an example of that. So a utility company comes in and says, hey, the cost of coal and gas went up. That affected our rates. So the cost is more of a fact. And that's probably an oversimplified version, and I know it gets much more complex than that for the commission. But let's just say that the commission came in and said, well, we've looked at that, and based on how oil and gas went up and the period oil and gas went up, we disagree to your statement that this rate should have gone up that much. It should have gone up 10% instead of 20, for example. In the case of the facts, that's going to be specific to that case, right? So in the bill, the goal was not to say the facts are different for the next rate case. So there would be no good reason to stay that next case, if that makes sense. That's because of the facts. Only in the case where, in that next case, if it was identical and they had to apply the same rules and procedures, then that would be the case that would be stayed to give the opportunity for the rules to be litigated, dealt with, and give the commission what the tools they need to address the next case, if that makes sense. Hopefully that helped, Representative Storer.
Any more questions? All right, Representative Locke, I've got one for you. So you've got Company A, Company B, Company C. So let's say Company B is the one that's got the lawsuit. Company A can still go in and ask for their rate hikes or whatever. It only is the company that's got this, the suit against the commission or the rules, correct?
The way the intent of the bill was basically what you mentioned, that the goal is, in this case, this disagreement on the rules is the case of this particular utility is disagreeing with the rules, and that case is related to that utility. Another utility comes in and says, hey, puts in a rate case. The goal of the bill was not to conflict with that. Now, because conceptually, at least I'm not the attorney, but the concept, of course, is that if the disagreement on the rules is with that specific utility was the intent. Thank you.
Any more questions? All right, let's bring up state or commission. And how many people are out there that wants to speak in the public on this bill? All right. Just please state your name and your position.
Good morning, Mr. Vice Chair, Representative Stivar. I'm Mary Throne, Chairman of the Wyoming Public Service Commission. With me is our Chief Counsel, John Burbridge. Nice to see all of you this morning. Don't believe I've met all of you yet, so welcome. I think it could be helpful, and we've discussed our concerns with this bill with Representative Locke, and appreciate him spending some time with us yesterday. I think what I might do is take a quick step back and tell you, just briefly, I know you're short on time, a little bit about how the commission operates. We function primarily as somewhat of a specialty court with 3 commissioners, all acting independently as judges, and then we have staff who analyze the cases. So we have multiple dockets for our utilities proceeding at any one time. And our entire focus with our general jurisdiction over utilities is working in the public interest. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that everything is related to everything else. Utilities have multiple tariffs. They engage in innovative rate making that it can be part of or separate from a general rate case. So there are a lot of moving pieces. And so many of our dockets are resolved at open meetings where there's not a lot of parties, not a lot of controversy. But then when we do have full-blown hearings, which will look a lot like trials, I know Representative Locke has certainly observed our, and participated in a public comment way in our rate making, our general rate case with Rocky Mountain Power. So there are multitudes of issues and parties. So for instance, in the last Rocky Mountain Power rate case, which has been appealed, the Wyoming Industrial Energy Consumers were a party, and they're now part of the appeal that's pending in district court here. And I give that all by way of background because each rate case will have multiple issues. And so we function as a contested case governed by the Administrative Procedure Act, which is what is cited here in Title 16. And then if our decisions are subject to judicial review, they're frequently mixed questions of law, in fact. I think Representative Locke is an engineer, and I appreciate that. I've worked with engineers a lot in my life, in my professional life, and continue to do it today. But lawyers, we like to mush everything together, and I'm an attorney by profession. So something may be appealed as a fact question, but then the parties and the courts get involved, and it becomes more not just a fact question, but maybe a mixed question of law and fact. And so my concern with this, and I think I understand the intent and I appreciate the intent, but a concern I have is that it may ultimately make it more difficult for the ratepayers and not necessarily potentially could increase their costs, but would lead to something that we call rate shock. So without speaking in any way that I can't because we have a pending rate case with Rocky Mountain Power, but let's say, for example, that we lose the appeal that's pending. And they have a pending rate case. If we stay the pending rate case, saying this law was in effect and it applied, that we stayed the pending rate case while the other appeal is pending and we lose, then we have to go back and make whatever adjustments are required to the rates, which would probably be an increase. Meanwhile, we've stayed this other rate case, which perhaps some of it is justified. And because we've delayed the implementation of the additional rate case, or maybe anything that's related, what's going to happen is by the time we come back in, we call it pancaking, and add all of that up, it would be a shock to the ratepayers, potentially. I think that's that's the risk that I see here. And I think maybe I've gone on for a few minutes here, maybe I'll stop and stand for any questions.
Questions? Representative Lane?
Thank you for coming today, Chairman, sorry. Thank you for coming today. I was just curious if you could tell me, having followed a little bit around the commission, what the average rate increase is that's sought from these companies?
Vice Chair Stivar, Representative Lean, it varies. I don't know that we've, it's sort of, it's a fluid situation because with the natural gas companies, they come in monthly, quarterly to adjust their rates under innovative rate making based primarily on the price of natural gas. Electric rates don't, we've seen, substantial rate increases, but, or proposed rate increases. The current one with Rocky Mountain Power is, well, they're here, they can tell you, but I think it's like 14% is what they've proposed. That's going from memory.
Follow-up?
Just to shift the topics a little bit, when you talk about rate increases, I apologize, Chairman. Thank you. To shift topics, when we talk about the rate increases, is there a tier at which the commission could impose these? So that, say we lose the litigation case and these now need to come forward, does the commission have the ability to say, we can only implement 2% over 2 months, 2 more % over 3 months, or something to that effect?
Yeah.
Mr.
Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Representative Lean. We could probably work something out with them, potentially, but they are entitled to recover their costs. And so if we've delayed their recovery of legitimate costs, then there's usually some sort of interest involved. And if I get over my skis, I'll phone a friend.
Representative Storr?
Thank you, Vice Chairman Stivar. Commissioner Throne, great to have you here. A couple questions, perhaps. So if it's hard to discern what is fact and what is law in these decisions, I guess my question might be, then how do we know how to apply this law, this new law that would say that a utility can't sue? And I guess I would ask about the constitutionality of saying someone can't sue, especially when they might want to sue over not being able to sue, perhaps. It just seems to complicate things a lot.
Vice Chairman Stivar. I haven't had that title for a long time, Representative Stivar.
I remember you.
Representative Storr, the AG's office looks at constitutionality, but under the principles that apply to, traditionally apply in the utility world, the Hope and Bluefield cases, which go back to the 40s. Again, utilities have the right to recover their costs, or it's a takings. But I sort of like the fruit analogy, if I could go back to that. There might be apples to apples, but one might be a Granny Smith and one might be a Delicious and one might be a Honeycrisp. I guess that's the complexity I see here, if I can use the fruit analogy. And the lawyers get involved, and then, so I have a lot of experience in a past life with administrative appeals, usually defending companies when somebody's challenged a permit. And under the APA, you tend to throw everything in. Again, you might argue all of the things that are listed in 16.3.114. You'll argue that they're arbitrary and capricious. You'll argue that it wasn't based on substantial evidence. You'll not always argue constitutionality. That's sort of rare, but that it violated the law. And so it becomes sort of a combination of factors, and then you file briefs and you look at the record, and the court can choose to say that it's really more of a question of law than a question of fact and say you didn't follow the law. So that's kind of how it all works in the real world, in my experience.
Representative Campbell?
I am not an attorney. But to me, with facts and law and decisions, does it not make, Mr. Chair, as I was in Chairman, thank you for your time. But with the fact of law and decisions, I'm just kind of perplexed by this, because does it not make sense to let the appeal of a rate code proceed before we move on to another rate appeal? I mean, wouldn't the findings of the first appeal have precedent going forward to the second, regardless of what kind of apples we got? As long as we got apples up in front of us and we have an apple that's involved in this appeal, would it not make this, would it not be prudent to let that appeal run its course before we jump into another case with another apple? Does that make sense?
Chairman?
Vice Chairman Stivar, Representative Campbell, potentially, but we also frequently have to do what we call compliance filings, or there are a lot of adjustments that happen in a rate case that can go backwards. I mean, we could deal with it in the next rate case. We can deal with it in a separate docket. And I think it's also important to note that the way this is written, it doesn't just apply to a general rate case. So I think it could be challenging to determine how to apply this to something related to a rate case that's not actually a general rate case.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director. A quick follow-up, because I have been beat up by my constituents on this rate case. And the question that they came to me, to be very specific, and I'm not an attorney, but they come to me and they say, Representative Campbell, we produce energy. Everybody understands a general business model. I don't understand law, but I do understand business models. And I understand that the West Coast is the end consumer for most of the energy that we're producing. I just do not understand why we, as a producer, need to provide infrastructure or such items for something that does not benefit the people of Wyoming. All we are doing is facilitating transportation of power out of our state to another state. So I'm just not exactly sure how some of these rate hikes benefit the citizens of Wyoming, and I have a very hard time explaining to my constituents what is to stop utilities from simply passing infrastructure cost on to ratepayers. Thank you.
Chairman?
Mr. Vice Chair, Representative Campbell, certainly we understand your constituents' concerns. And without discussing any specific rate case, that is what we do. It's a matter of cost allocation, making sure that Wyoming is only paying for the costs that benefit it. And in the last rate case, that's the issue that's on appeal primarily, is that we found one of the costs was not beneficial to Wyoming. And that's being challenged.
In follow-up, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director. Again, going back to the original discussion, with an appeal like something with that going, I'm reading into this bill that the intent is to make them do one before we move on to another. Is there a remediation that you could recommend on this that could help us in that direction?
Mr. Vice Chair, Representative Campbell, I did commit to Representative Locke that I would try to think of an amendment, and I have to apologize that I not succeeded. I think we could look, perhaps during the interim, look at tools that don't restrict access to the courts, but tools that perhaps are already within our power, or tools that we could look at. And I'm not sure really that those tools have proven beneficial in other states, but some states do require multi-year rate cases. So it is unusual, and I think our largest utility had not been in for a general rate case for a long time. So they had one in 2020, and then the one that we just did last year, and now they have another one. That is somewhat unusual to have that many rate cases, that close together.
All right,
But delaying legitimate cost recovery, assuming that it's there, only can harm the ratepayer later. I mean, it's better to have sort of incremental increases if they're justified, as opposed to finding your rates going up dramatically.
All right, let's move on and bring up gentleman in the back that wanted to speak on this.
While he's coming up, Mr. Chairman, in case I don't come up again, I did want to let all of you know, particularly those of you who are in Rocky Mountain Power Service territory, that we're having a public comment hearing tonight on Zoom. It's virtual. I can send the link. Someone will send the link to Representative Locke. So if you'd like to participate, because it's winter time, and because you're in town, we decided it was safer to do a virtual public comment hearing than have all of us out on the roads, so.
Thank you, and please don't leave, because we're probably going to call you back up. Thank you. Come up, sir. Go ahead and state your name and who you're representing.
Chairman Stivar, my name is Nathan Nicholas from the Cook Law Firm on behalf of Rocky Mountain Power.
Who are you with again?
I'm with the Cook Law Firm representing Rocky Mountain Power. As we look at the proposed legislation before you, there's a number of concerns, including constitutionality concerns. But I really wanted to get into the practical issues that we see looking forward, should this become law. As Commissioner Throne said, the bill's likely, the way appeals and litigation occur, this bill is likely to stay all rate cases regardless of the type of litigation and the challenge that's going to occur. The primary concern we have is the speed of the courts doesn't match the speed of business. Some of these cases can go on for years. As a litigator, I personally have cases that have been going on since before COVID. And they've been up, appealed, handed back down, gone up again on appeal. And so that's the nature of litigation. So what happens when these rate cases are stayed? This would include annual true-up mechanisms like the ECAM. It would halt any proceedings that would return rates to the consumers. It would halt any of the consistent standard rate changes that occur for our costs, as Commissioner Throne mentioned. And it would cause most proceedings involving a single utility to grind to a halt. In doing so, it would cause our costs to build up into a deferral account. Now, the deferral account then is entitled to accrue interest, and we're allowed to accrue interest on those as well. So when the appeal is resolved, the utilities, we look at two issues here. The utility can recoup those costs, and do we do it in a one lump sum type of billing? Do we do it amortized over 5 years, in which that deferral account continues to accrue interest over 5 years? And what happens is, what we see the potential for is a price whiplash to the consumer. The consumer is going to get a sudden whiplash and increase in fees that they may not have seen for 4 years, and all of a sudden they're going to have to eat 4 years worth of costs and rate adjustments over the next 5 years, along with upcoming rate adjustments for new costs that may occur. And those are the concerns that Rocky Mountain Power sees as the effect to the consumer. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir, for being here. When we're looking at these, because it seems to me like there's a whole bunch of different assets or aspects, is it possible that we can separate out the different aspects to where there is the rate hikes that are uncontested or not worrisome as opposed to those are? Is there the ability to separate those two out to where we can move forward with the uncontested aspects?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Camel, in my experience as a litigator, it tends to be the kitchen sink approach. It's not as though we can separate certain claims from other claims in front of the court. We might be able to bifurcate those, but that's the court's judicial discretion to bifurcate cases based on one issue and another issue. And in fact, judicial economy, the concept of judicial economy in front of the courts is actually the opposite of that. They look for ways to combine everything together, because if they're going to have to make one decision based on the same facts and occurrences, they usually combine all of those issues into one. Thank you.
Representative Lane?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for being here today. My question is about the chancery courts that Wyoming has that we've just put a judge in place for. Would you see that Rocky Mountain Power could potentially use the chancery courts versus draw it out through the district courts or beyond?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lean, I think that that's a potential, but I think that would probably require a jurisdictional change within the statutes for these issues. And I apologize, Representative Lean, Mr. Chairman, I don't have the enabling statutes with the Chancery Court in front of me, but it's a very restricted list of issues that are allowed to be brought in front of the Chancery Court. Without that legislation in front of me, I can't answer it entirely.
Any more questions? Thank you, sir, for your testimony. Please stand by.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody else in the audience? Anybody online? I forgot that one. Please state your name and.
Mr. Vice Chair, Tom Van Cleef. I am a small business owner up in Casper. And I'd like to start out by saying I'm in favor of this bill. I had some prepared remarks, but I've been taking some notes. And if I could, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm certainly not a lobbyist, because I'm not here being paid to espouse any particular situation or any particular point of view. And I'm certainly not able to charge billable hours for this. As you saw when I walked up, I'm still on my steel toes and jeans from working this morning. When I read this bill, and I've read this bill and we've provided this bill, I've talked about this bill as recently as last night, very late last night, with some of my friends and neighbors up in Casper. Uniformly, they are in favor of this, at least in concept. And it doesn't have anything to do with the weeds that we get down into as to what the rate cases are or what the rates are or who's paying what. I think most of the people that we have in my neighborhood, in my town, and all over the state understand that you have to pay for what you're going to get. So having the utilities be able to recover fair, just, and reasonable rates to recover what they need is fine. There's not a question with that. I think everybody also understands that you've got the right in the United States of America, thanks to our Constitution and thanks to Wyoming's Constitution. I want to sue somebody, I can sue them for anything I want at any point in time in whatever court will hear the case. Absolutely. When I read this bill, I don't see that there's any impediment to a utility or to an individual challenging the Public Service Commission's rulings, challenging their decision on a rate case or what was that called, an ECAM, or any of those things. What I read this as is if there is a challenge, not to how the facts were interpreted, not to how the rules were applied, but if there's a legal challenge to the constitutionality or legality of a rule that the Public Service Commission uses, or the enabling legislation that promulgated that rule, then that presents a challenge. First of all, as a ratepayer, how do I know what rules are going to be used to determine the rates? So how do I know whether or not what the utility is asking for is fair, just, and reasonable, and whether or not we ought to say, yeah, the price of everything is going up, or we ought to say, hang on a second, the rules of the game are changing right in the middle of this whole thing, as Representative Campbell had pointed out. So this is not a question of whether or not the Public Service Commission or challenges or legal challenges or lawsuits that are brought by any utility. Folks, I got friends who work in the utilities. I'm in the oil and gas industry. We use electricity. We use a lot of electricity. The lineman, he gets a Christmas card from us, okay? The guy who comes out and reads the meters, he gets a Christmas card and a little fruit basket, lots of apples, okay? So this is an important question for everybody. So it isn't a question of the interpretation. It's a question of, are the rules legal and constitutional? And if that's the question, then can we really use those rules until we know whether or not they're legal? Can we really use laws until we know whether or not they're constitutional? Now, we've heard challenges, we've heard discussion, and forgive me, sir, as I refer to my chicken scratch notes. The pancake effect and rate shock. I'm sorry, I was writing really quick. Yeah, we understand that's a possibility. In fact, we had that discussion last night at I won't say the civic organization, at a civic organization meeting, okay? And it's a valid question. But I've worked with the folks at the Public Service Commission, and I've worked with the folks at the Office of the Consumer Advocate, as have a lot of my neighbors. And we have a lot of confidence that the public servants that we have in our Public Service Commission and the Office of the Consumer Advocate can determine and discriminate, differentiate between a second rate case that comes in, that's been entered, and the numbers are based on a hedge against the challenge from this first rate case failing, versus a rate case that's just based on fair, just, and reasonable recoveries. We get a lot of faith and confidence in those folks. We've seen them do the right thing in the past. We are sure they will do the right thing in the future. And they've got a difficult job of balancing the interests of the utilities and the people of the state of Wyoming. There's a lot of politics involved. Those are all critical questions, and I'm glad I don't serve on the Public Service Commission. Mr. Vice Chairman and members of this committee, thank you for doing what you're doing, because I don't think I could do what you're doing. My point on this is, reading this in black letter, the only time this law would impact a rate case is if that rate case depended on a rule that was either being challenged because it was illegal, or it was the law that enabled that rule was being challenged because it was unconstitutional. A lawsuit that somebody files, utility number one puts in a rate case, or they put in an e-camera, they put anything in before the Public Service Commission, and they don't get what they want. Well, if I was a stockholder of that company, I would absolutely want them to appeal that decision. And I would want them to appeal the decision based on you didn't look at the facts right, or you interpreted the law wrong. Interpreting of the law is not what this bill covers. Now, if the utility goes in and says, well, that was all wrong, and you interpreted the rules wrong, and you did the numbers wrong, but I also think this is unconstitutional, or that's an illegal rule. Well, with all due respect to Chairman Throne and to all the great legal minds that we have, and I understand what all the lawyers were saying. We've all seen it. Take everything you can, throw it in a pot, throw as much spaghetti as you can at the wall and see what sticks. We all get it. But I also have faith and confidence in the ability of our friends and neighbors and our citizens to be able to separate out the chaff from the wheat. I'm in the oil and gas industry. I produce 140,000 gallons of fresh water every day. I get to sell maybe 20 barrels of oil out of that. I'm in the water business. I sell the byproduct. But if we can do that with something that's 350 million years old, I think the minds that we have here in the state can probably sort those things out as well. I truly do. So as this, go back to my notes. As this proceeds forward, it very specifically does not address things where there's a question of the interpretation or the application of a rule. It doesn't apply to things where there's an interpretation or an application of numbers or math. Okay? They told me there would be no math today, so I'm not going to go into the math. What it applies to is if you challenge the legality or the constitutionality of the rules, that the overworked, overtasked individuals in our Public Service Commission and the Office of the Consumer Advocate have to work with. And as a ratepayer, I would hate to see that pancake effect occur because we determined that something was unconstitutional. And then everything else is thrown up. How far back do we go? How far back do we look? That's a decision for the lawyers and the judges. And I'm sure, as my friend and colleague who testified before can say, yeah, it could take years. That does not necessarily mean that all of these things have to be held up. I'm also a little concerned that it appears that some of the utilities are using a case of, I'm going to scare the bejeebers out of you. Because look at all the horrible things that can happen unless we continue to do business as usual. All your rates will go up. You won't get any of your funding back. Well, the worst thing that happens for the next couple of weeks or months is that my rates don't go up. I don't get put out of business. Okay? But I also served 20 years in the military, and I had a lot of people running around telling me the sky's falling. I'm still here. We're all still here. So rather than yield to some of the worst case scenarios, folks, I was a fighter pilot. I'm still alive because I planned for the worst case scenario. You can plan for it, but you don't execute it unless it actually happens. I don't think this bill is going to make the sky fall. I truly don't. because it limits it. And if the utilities want to make sure that they don't have a problem, perhaps they should examine whether or not they throw out litigation that is broad and, as the lawyer who testified before stated, throw everything into a pot. As the chairman testified, throw everything into a pot and litigate everything. Perhaps if this law is passed, one of the unintended consequences will be that any litigation that proceeds will be narrowly focused. It will focus on the real issues. It'll focus on the things that are actionable, both for the citizens, the Public Service Commission, and the utilities. Let's clean the spaghetti off the wall and focus on what we need to do for the people of the state of Wyoming. Mr. Vice Chairman, I'll stand for questions.
Questions? Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Is there anybody else that would like to speak on this? If not, we'll close public comment and bring the bill back to the dais. Nobody's online, are you? What's your pleasure with the bill, committee?
Move the bill.
Moved by Representative Lane, seconded by Representative Wharf. Let's go discussions. I'll turn it back over to, thanks a lot. Let's go page by page. Anybody got it for page 1? Page 2? Page 3? Page 4. There's a typo, line 1 where? On page? Which? Representative Lucas, page what and line what? Oh, page 4.
Thanks to Representative Wharf for discovering this. Page 4, line 1, the word therefore is misspelled.
Okay. Somebody that's better in English than writing than I am better answer that question. So that's your amendment?
I can bring that to the attention of the attorneys.
All right, thank you. Anything on page 5? So what's your pleasure? Moved by Representative Wharf. Seconded by Representative Brown.
Mr. Vice Chairman, I think we already have a motion. I think the bill was moved by Representative Lean and seconded by Representative Wharf.
Question has been called. Will you please take the roll?
This is a roll call vote on House Bill 218, Public Utilities Stays During Resolution of Lawsuits. Representative Brown,
Aye.
Representative Campbell,
I'm an aye.
Representative Lean,
Aye.
Representative Lucas.
Aye.
Representative Riggins excused. Representative Storer,
No.
Representative Stivar,
Aye.
Representative Wharf,
Aye.
Chairman Locke.
Aye.
We have 7 aye, 1 no, and 1 excused.
That concludes our business. And I expect you'll run this on the floor there, Mr. Chairman.
You're okay, I think you get back.
All right, you can take it back now.
I wanted to take a moment to thank you all for being here. I really do appreciate everyone's support to the meeting. And I forgot to ask, did we have anybody online? Did we?
No one joined the meeting.
No one joined it, okay, great. But thank you all for attending, and so the meeting is adjourned.